The copper sun hung like a bloodshot eye over Whiskey Creek, casting long shadows across the auction block where Emma and Eleanor Blackburn stood trembling, their wrists bound with rough hemp rope. The year was 1875, and in the booming gold rush town of Whiskey Creek, Colorado, human commerce wasn't unheard of, even if it wasn't advertised in polite company. "Two fine women, fresh from Boston," bellowed the auctioneer, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth. Their pa lost everything in the crash of '73, and he signed the papers fair and square, good for cooking, cleaning, and whatever else you might fancy. The crowd of miners, drifters, and ranch hands chuckled appreciatively, eyeing the sisters with undisguised hunger. At 23, Emma was the elder, her honey-blonde hair falling in waves down her back, despite the dust of travel. Eleanor, barely 19, clutched her sister's arm, her dark eyes wide with terror, chestnut hair escaping her once neat bun. "Starting bid is $50 for the pair," the auctioneer shouted. "Who'll give me 50? 60, called a grizzled miner, his face pockmarked with scars. 75, countered a portly saloon owner, his silk vest straining against his belly. Emma fought back tears, remembering her father's bloodshot eyes as he'd signed the contract, trading his daughters to pay gambling debts. Their mother had died years ago, and with no other family to turn to, they had been bundled onto a westbound train before dawn. $100, roared a voice from the back, and the crowd parted to reveal a mountain of a man with hands like ham hocks and a cruel twist to his mouth. "100 for both, and I aim to get my money's worth," Eleanor whimpered, and Emma stood straighter, trying to shield her sister with her body. The auctioneer grinned, revealing blackened gums. "100 going once. $500. The voice cut through the crowd like a knife. It wasn't particularly loud, but it carried an authority that commanded attention. The crowd turned as one to see a tall figure leaning against a hitching post, arms crossed over a dust-covered buckskin vest. Noah Holloway straightened to his full height of just over 6 feet, his movements deliberate as he stepped forward. Sunlight glinted off his dark blonde hair, and the star pinned to his vest, the sheriff's badge of Whiskey Creek. "I said 500, he repeated, his blue eyes never leaving the auctioneer's face. "For both ladies." The auctioneer's mouth worked silently for a moment. "Sheriff, I don't know if the paperwork's legal enough," Noah said, his voice level. "And I'm making a fair bid, $500 for the Blackburn sisters." Emma felt hope flicker in her chest for the first time since their father had summoned them to his study 3 days ago. The sheriff was young, perhaps 30, and while his face was weathered by sun and wind, his eyes held a steadiness that made her breath catch. 500 going once, the auctioneer said, scanning the crowd nervously. No one moved to counter the offer. Even the large man who'd bid $100 stayed silent, though his eyes burned with resentment. 500 going twice. Sold to Sheriff Holloway. Noah approached the auction block, pulling a leather pouch from his pocket. He counted out gold pieces into the auctioneer's palm, then turned to the sisters. "Miss Blackburn," he said, addressing Emma with a slight nod. "Miss Eleanor, if you'll come with me." Emma hesitated, uncertain whether they were trading one form of bondage for another. As if reading her thoughts, Noah pulled a knife from his belt and cut through the ropes binding their wrists. "I can't undo what your father did," he said quietly, so only they could hear. "But I can offer you safety and work at my ranch outside town. You'll have your own cabin, fair wages, and no one will trouble you there." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you help us, Sheriff?" Noah's expression darkened momentarily. "Let's just say I've seen what happens to women with no protection in towns like this. I've got a ranch that needs tending while I'm in town seeing to my duties. It's honest work, and you'll be treated with respect." Emma rubbed her chafed wrists, studying the sheriff's face for any sign of deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "We accept your offer, Sheriff Holloway, and thank you." He led them through the dispersing crowd toward a sturdy wagon parked at the edge of the square. As they walked, Emma felt the stares of the townspeople following them, some curious, others disappointed. The large man who'd bid against Noah spat on the ground as they passed. "Don't mind Marcus Green," Noah said quietly. "He owns the biggest mine outside town and thinks that entitles him to whatever he wants." He wanted us, Eleanor whispered, shuddering. Well, he didn't get you, Noah said firmly, helping them into the wagon. And he won't, as long as I'm sheriff. As the wagon pulled away from Whiskey Creek, Emma felt the weight of the last few days pressing down on her. What would their lives be like now, working for this quiet, intense sheriff? Was he truly as honorable as he seemed, or would they discover they'd merely traded one form of servitude for another? The wagon rattled over the rough trail leading out of town, and Emma watched the back of Noah Holloway's broad shoulders as he guided the horses. Whatever lay ahead, she told herself, it had to be better than what they'd left behind. The journey to Noah Holloway's ranch took nearly 2 hours, the wagon climbing steadily into the foothills of the mountains that ringed Whiskey Creek. As they traveled, the landscape transformed from dusty plains to rolling meadows dotted with pine and aspen. It's beautiful, Eleanor murmured, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders as they crested a hill and the ranch came into view. A modest but well-built log house stood in a natural clearing, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. A small creek cut across one corner of the property, lined with cottonwoods that rustled in the afternoon breeze. In the distance, a herd of cattle grazed peacefully. It's not much, Noah said, guiding the horses toward the house. But it's peaceful. How do you manage both the ranch and being sheriff? Emma asked, curiosity overcoming her natural caution. Noah's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Not very well lately. I've got a man, Jasper, who helps with the cattle, but he's getting on in years. The house and garden have been neglected since my sister married and moved to Denver last year. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a small cabin set about 50 yards from the main house. This is where my sister lived. It's yours now, both of you. There's a pump out back for water, and I had Jasper stock the pantry when I heard about the auction. Emma's brow furrowed. You knew about us before today? Noah's expression darkened as he helped them down from the wagon. Word travels. Your father telegraphed several potential buyers before you arrived. I intercepted the messages at the telegraph office. And you decided to buy us instead? Emma couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Noah met her gaze directly. I decided to offer you protection and employment, Miss Blackburn. The buying part was unfortunate but necessary given the circumstances. Eleanor touched her sister's arm. Emma, he saved us from something terrible. We should be grateful. Emma sighed, knowing her sister was right. I apologize, Sheriff. It's been difficult. Noah nodded. Understandable, and please, it's just Noah out here. He gestured to the cabin. Why don't you get settled? There's a change of clothes inside. They were my sister's, so they might not fit perfectly. Rest today, and tomorrow I'll show you around. With that, he tipped his hat and led the horses toward the barn, leaving the sisters to explore their new home. The cabin was simple but comfortable, one main room with a small stove, table, and 2 chairs, plus a curtained-off sleeping area with a large bed they would share. A small bookshelf held a dozen well-worn volumes, and cheerful blue curtains framed the windows. It's clean, Eleanor said with relief, running her finger along the tabletop. And private. Emma nodded, setting down the small bundle that contained their few remaining possessions. Yes, but what do we really know about Sheriff Holloway? What does he truly expect from us? Eleanor gave her sister a reproachful look. He saved us, Emma. He could have left us to that awful auction. For $500, Emma reminded her. That's no small sum. Eleanor began exploring the cabin, opening a trunk at the foot of the bed to reveal neatly folded dresses and undergarments. Perhaps he's wealthy? A wealthy man doesn't become sheriff in a mining town, Emma said, but her protests sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Despite her suspicions, she couldn't deny that Noah Holloway had shown them nothing but respect thus far. They spent the remainder of the afternoon settling in, washing away the grime of travel with water from the pump, and changing into the simple but well-made dresses they found in the trunk. As the sun began to set, a knock at the door startled them both. Emma opened it to find Noah standing there, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. He'd removed his badge and gun belt, and in his hands he held a covered basket. I thought you might be hungry, he said, holding out the basket. Nothing fancy, just some bread, cheese, and cold chicken. The rich aroma made Emma's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. They hadn't eaten since a meager breakfast at dawn. "Thank you," she said, accepting the basket. "That's very kind." Noah shifted his weight, suddenly seeming less sure of himself than he had in town. "I'll be heading back to Whiskey Creek at first light sheriff's duties. Jasper will be around if you need anything, and I've written down what needs doing around the house and garden." He nodded toward a folded paper tucked into the basket. "But please, take tomorrow to rest. There's no rush." "When will you return?" Eleanor asked. "In a few days, most likely. I try to spend at least 3 nights a week here at the ranch." He hesitated. "I want to be clear about something. You're free to leave whenever you wish. I'll even provide transportation to the next town over and enough money to start fresh." Emma studied him, confusion evident on her face. "If that's true, why spend $500 on us?" Noah's expression softened slightly. "Because no one should be sold like cattle, Miss Blackburn. And because I couldn't stand by and watch what would have happened if someone like Marcus Green had won that auction." With that, he bid them good night and strode back toward the main house, leaving Emma staring after him with a troubled expression. "See," Eleanor said, bringing the basket to the table. "He's a good man." Emma remained unconvinced. Perhaps he's just more patient than the others. But as they ate the simple but satisfying meal, Emma found herself wondering about the quiet sheriff and the decency he'd shown them. In her experience, men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. What would Noah Holloway eventually demand as payment for his generosity? The answer to that question would have to wait. For now, they were safe, fed, and together, which was more than they could have hoped for that morning. True to his word, Noah was gone when they awoke the next morning. Through the cabin window, Emma watched as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the empty yard. A sense of relief mingled with an unexpected pang of disappointment. "I suppose we should see what work he expects us to do," she said, retrieving the folded paper from the basket. The note was written in a surprisingly elegant hand. "Ladies, I've left this list not as demands but as suggestions for how you might make yourselves useful if you choose to stay. The garden behind the house needs tending vegetables that will feed you through winter. The house itself could use a woman's touch dusting, sweeping, perhaps mending some curtains that have seen better days. There's flour and sugar in the pantry if you're inclined to baking. Jasper lives in the small cabin by the barn. He's hard of hearing but kind. He'll show you the chickens if you ask fresh eggs daily, if they're well tended. Take what you need from the house and garden. Your labor is your payment for room and board, but I'll provide fair wages besides once we settle on what's reasonable. N. Holloway." "It seems reasonable," Eleanor said, reading over Emma's shoulder. "And he's paying us wages." Emma folded the note carefully. "Let's see this garden of his." They spent the morning exploring the property, finding the garden overgrown but salvageable. Chickens scratched in a fenced yard near the barn, and they collected 6 eggs. The elderly Jasper tipped his hat to them, but kept his distance, seemingly shy around women. The main house was solidly built, but showed signs of neglect dust on the mantel, cobwebs in corners, and, as Noah had mentioned, several curtains hanging in tatters. But there were also signs of refinement Emma hadn't expected. A bookshelf filled with classics and history volumes, a decent piano in one corner, and family photographs displayed in silver frames. One photograph caught Emma's attention, a younger Noah in a Union Army uniform, standing beside a pretty young woman who shared his features. His sister, Emma guessed. Another showed an older couple, presumably his parents, standing proudly in front of the very house she now stood in. "He fought for the Union," Eleanor said, noting the photograph. "That's something in his favor." Emma nodded absently, moving to examine a desk in the corner. A stack of official-looking papers sat beside an inkwell, and a framed law certificate hung on the wall above. "He studied law in Denver," she said with surprise, reading the certificate. "Noah Holloway, Juris Doctor. A lawyer and a sheriff and a rancher," Eleanor mused. "Quite the accomplished man." Emma continued her exploration, finding nothing to suggest hidden vices or secrets. No liquor bottles, no questionable photographs, nothing but the home of a seemingly decent, educated man who lived simply despite his accomplishments. As the days passed, they fell into a routine. Mornings were spent in the garden, afternoons cleaning the main house or mending clothes. Eleanor, always the more domestic of the two, took to baking bread and pies with enthusiasm. Emma, who had trained as a teacher before their father's financial collapse, discovered Noah's extensive library and spent evenings reading by lamplight. On the third day, they heard the approach of horses near sunset. Emma looked up from her weeding to see Noah returning, accompanied by a heavily laden pack horse. He dismounted with fluid grace, patting his horse's neck, before turning to notice her in the garden. "Miss Blackburn," he called, removing his hat. "I trust you've been comfortable." Emma brushed dirt from her hands, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Yes, thank you. We've been keeping busy." Noah approached, his gaze taking in the neat rows she'd restored to the garden. "I can see that. You've accomplished more in 3 days than I managed in 3 months. It's satisfying work," Emma admitted. "Different from teaching, but not unpleasant." Noah's eyebrows rose. "You were a teacher?" "In Boston, yes. For girls, Eleanor's age." She didn't add that she'd lost her position when their father's disgrace became public knowledge. Noah nodded thoughtfully. "We could use a teacher in Whiskey Creek. The miners' children run wild, with no schooling to speak of." Before Emma could respond, Eleanor emerged from the main house, wiping flour from her hands. "Sheriff Holloway, welcome back. I've just put a pie in the oven, apple and cinnamon." Noah's face softened at Eleanor's enthusiasm. "That sounds wonderful, Miss Eleanor. And please, it's just Noah out here." They shared a meal together that evening, roast rabbit Noah had caught on his return journey, vegetables from the garden, and Eleanor's pie. Emma watched with interest as Noah's usual reserve melted slightly in Eleanor's cheerful presence. He answered her endless questions about the ranch, the town, and his duties as sheriff with patient good humor. "How did you come to be sheriff?" Emma asked during a lull in the conversation. "Especially with a law degree." Noah set down his fork, his expression turning serious. "After the war, I came home to find my father ill. He'd started this ranch, and I took over its management. When he passed, I considered selling and setting up a law practice in Denver. But this land has been in our family since before I was born." "And the sheriff's position?" Emma pressed. Noah's mouth twisted in a wry smile. "That was circumstantial. The previous sheriff was killed during a robbery at the bank. I helped organize a posse to track the robbers. When we returned, the town council asked me to take the badge. It was meant to be temporary." "But you stayed," Eleanor said softly. Noah nodded. "I discovered I could do more good with a badge than with law books. Mining towns attract desperate men. Someone needs to keep the peace." "Even if it means buying women at auction?" Emma couldn't help asking, though she softened the question with a small smile. Noah met her gaze directly. "That was the first and only time. And as I said, you're free to leave whenever you wish." "And go where?" Emma asked. "We know no one west of the Mississippi, have few skills suited to frontier life, and even fewer resources." "You're resourceful women," Noah said. "You'd manage, but you're welcome to stay as long as you like, on the terms we agreed." As they finished the meal, Emma found herself studying Noah Holloway with new eyes. There was a depth to him she hadn't expected, a complexity beyond the stern sheriff who'd purchased them from the auction block. His quiet dignity and evident intelligence intrigued her, despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance. Later that night, as she and Eleanor prepared for bed in their cabin, her sister voiced what Emma had been reluctant to acknowledge. "I like him," Eleanor said simply, brushing out her long hair. "He's a good man." Emma sighed. "He seems to be, but we've been deceived by seeming goodness before." Eleanor set down her brush, turning to face her sister. "Noah isn't father, Emma. Not every man will betray us." Emma winced at her sister's directness. "I know that, but we must be practical. Our situation remains precarious." "Does it?" Eleanor challenged. "We have shelter, food, honest work, and protection. That's more security than we've had since Mother died." Emma couldn't argue with that logic, but something still held her back from fully trusting their situation or the man who had created it. "Just be careful with your heart, Ellie," she said finally. "We don't know what the future holds." Eleanor smiled knowingly. "I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching. Perhaps you should heed your own advice." Emma flushed, ready to deny the accusation, but Eleanor had already slipped into bed, effectively ending the conversation. As Emma extinguished the lamp, she found her thoughts returning to Noah, the intensity in his blue eyes when he spoke of justice, the careful gentleness of his large hands, the respect with which he treated them both. Against her better judgment, she was beginning to care what he thought of her. It was a dangerous path, she knew. Whatever his virtues, Noah Holloway had purchased them like property. The imbalance of power between them could never truly be overcome, no matter how respectfully he treated them now. With that sobering thought, Emma closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. Tomorrow would bring more work, more interactions with the enigmatic sheriff, and she feared more confusion for her increasingly troubled heart. Summer settled over the ranch in waves of golden light and warm breezes. June gave way to July, and with each passing week, the initial awkwardness between Noah and the Blackburn sisters diminished. The garden flourished under Emma and Eleanor's care, producing more vegetables than the three of them could eat. They began preserving jams and pickles for the winter months, working together in the kitchen during the hottest parts of the day. Noah's trips to town maintained their regular schedule, but Emma noticed he seemed increasingly reluctant to leave and increasingly pleased to return. He brought back small gifts ribbons for Eleanor's hair, books for Emma, seeds for plants they had mentioned wanting to grow. One evening in late July, Emma sat on the porch of the main house, shelling peas into a bowl while Noah mended a bridle nearby. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the distant mountains stood purple against the horizon. Eleanor had retired early with a headache, leaving them alone, a circumstance that occurred more frequently of late, making Emma suspect her sister's matchmaking intentions. "I received a letter from the town council today," Noah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "They're interested in establishing a proper school." Emma's hands stilled. "Oh?" Noah nodded, not looking up from his work. "They've offered to convert the old assay office. It's a solid building and centrally located." "That's good news for the children," Emma said carefully. Noah finally glanced up, his blue eyes meeting hers. "They need a teacher, someone educated, patient, someone who understands children need structure, but also kindness." Emma's heart quickened. "Are you offering me the position?" "I mentioned your qualifications to the council. They're prepared to offer $20 a month, plus a small apartment above the schoolroom." Noah set the bridle aside. "You wouldn't have to live in town if you didn't want to. The wagon ride is only 2 hours each way." Emma set the bowl of peas on the porch beside her. "You've given this some thought." "I have," Noah admitted. "You're wasted here, Emma. Gardening and cooking are necessary skills, but your mind, your education, those shouldn't be lost to frontier life." The use of her first name didn't escape her notice. Over the weeks, they had gradually dropped formalities, though Emma still felt a flutter when he addressed her so directly. "And Eleanor," she asked, "would be welcome to stay here or join you in town." "There's room enough in the apartment for both of you." Noah hesitated. "Or she could remain here while you teach. The choice would be yours, both of yours." Emma considered the offer, turning it over in her mind. Teaching again, shaping young minds, returning to the profession she'd loved, the prospect was undeniably appealing. Yet the thought of leaving the ranch, of seeing Noah only in passing, created an unexpected ache in her chest. "May I think about it?" she asked finally. Noah nodded. "Of course. The school won't be ready until September at the earliest." They lapsed into silence again. But something had shifted between them. Emma felt Noah watching her as she returned to her task, his gaze a tangible weight. "Why did you really buy us that day?" she asked suddenly, the question that had lingered for months finally finding voice. "The truth, Noah." Noah was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. "My mother was sold much the same way. Not at public auction, but traded by her father to settle a debt." He twisted the leather strap in his hands. "She was 16. The man was 53. Emma's breath caught. "Your father?" Noah shook his head. "No, a man named Harrison Green." "Green, like Marcus Green from town?" "His father." Noah's jaw tightened. "My mother escaped after 2 years of hell. My father found her half dead by the roadside and nursed her back to health. They fell in love, married, built this place together." Emma set aside her work entirely now, turning to face him. And you? I was born a year later. My sister 4 years after that. Noah met her gaze directly. Harrison Green never stopped looking for my mother. When I was 12, he found us. My father fought him off, but took a bullet in the process. The wound never properly healed. It's what killed him eventually. And Harrison Green died during the war, but his son Marcus inherited his temperament, his business, and his grudges. Noah's expression darkened. When I heard 2 Eastern women were being sold to settle a debt, and that Marcus was interested, I couldn't let history repeat itself. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. So, it was revenge against the Greens? Or atonement for your mother? Noah set aside the bridle and moved to sit beside her on the porch steps. Neither, or both. I don't know anymore. He ran a hand through his hair. I only knew I couldn't stand by and watch what would happen. And now? Emma asked softly. Why do you let us stay? Pay us wages? Offer me a teaching position? Noah was silent for a moment, his profile outlined against the darkening sky. Because in these months, you've become more than an obligation or a good deed. Much more. The intensity in his voice made Emma's heart beat faster. She knew she should retreat, maintain the careful distance she'd established, but found herself unable to move away. Noah, she began, but he shook his head. You don't need to say anything. I understand our situation remains complicated. I would never presume or pressure you. He stood abruptly. It's getting dark. I should see you safely to your cabin. Emma rose as well, gathering the bowl of peas. I know the way. Noah's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course you do. Good night, Emma. Good night, she whispered, watching as he turned and entered the main house. Emma walked slowly to the cabin, her mind whirling with Noah's revelations and the unspoken feelings that had hung in the air between them. When she entered, she found Eleanor sitting up in bed, a knowing smile on her face. I thought you had a headache, Emma said accusingly. Eleanor shrugged. It passed. Did you and Noah have a nice talk? Emma sat heavily on the edge of the bed. He offered me a teaching position in town. Eleanor's eyes widened. Emma, that's wonderful. Will you take it? I don't know. Emma began unlacing her boots. He also told me about his mother, why he intervened at the auction. And, Eleanor prompted when Emma fell silent. And nothing. He made it clear there are no expectations. Emma avoided her sister's gaze. We should sleep. Tomorrow will be busy. Eleanor wasn't fooled. You care for him. It wasn't a question, but Emma answered anyway. It doesn't matter if I do. Our situation remains what it is he purchased us, Eleanor. That fact can't be erased, no matter how honorable his intentions. Eleanor sighed, settling back against her pillow. Perhaps not. But facts aren't everything, Emma. Sometimes the heart knows better. Emma extinguished the lamp without responding, but sleep eluded her for hours. Her mind kept returning to Noah's face in the fading light, to the undisguised emotion in his voice when he'd said she'd become much more than an obligation. Despite all her caution, all her rational arguments against it, Emma was forced to acknowledge a difficult truth. She was falling in love with Noah Holloway. August brought scorching days and sudden violent thunderstorms that rolled off the mountains with little warning. One such storm caught Emma in the garden, far from shelter. Rain fell in sheets, soaking her to the skin in seconds. As she gathered her tools, ready to make a dash for the cabin, a strong hand gripped her elbow. "This way!" Noah shouted over the thunder, guiding her toward the barn rather than the more distant cabin. They burst through the barn doors, breathless and dripping. The sudden transition from chaos to stillness was jarring. Rain hammered on the roof, but inside, the barn was warm and smelled of hay and horses. Noah's stallion nickered softly from his stall. "That came on fast," Noah said, pushing wet hair from his face. Water dripped from his eyelashes, and his shirt clung to the broad planes of his chest. Emma became acutely aware of her own sodden appearance, her dress plastered to her body, her hair escaping its pins to hang in wet ropes down her back. She crossed her arms self-consciously. "Thank you for the rescue," she said, trying to inject lightness into her voice. Noah nodded, his eyes darting away from her, as if he too was aware of their disheveled state. "Wait here. I have some dry blankets in the tack room." He disappeared into a small side room, returning moments later with two rough wool blankets. He handed one to Emma and draped the other around his own shoulders. "The storm should pass quickly," he said, moving to stand by the barn door, gazing out at the sheeting rain. "But we might as well get comfortable." Emma wrapped the blanket around herself gratefully, then settled on a bale of hay. "Where's Eleanor?" "In town with Jasper. They left this morning to purchase supplies, remember?" Noah leaned against the doorframe. "They'll likely wait out the storm there." Emma nodded, remembering now. The realization that they were truly alone perhaps for hours sent a small thrill of anxiety through her. As if sensing her discomfort, Noah kept his distance, telling her about a mountain lion he'd spotted near the north pasture, describing his plans to repair the roof of the main house before winter. His deep voice blended with the rhythm of the rain, creating a strange intimacy in the dim light of the barn. Gradually, Emma relaxed. This was Noah, after all, the man who had shown her nothing but respect for months, who had opened his home and offered her a chance to resume her teaching career. If she couldn't trust him now, she never would. "I've decided to accept the teaching position," she said during a lull in conversation. Noah turned from the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "That's good news. The children will benefit greatly from your experience." "I'd like to stay here, though," Emma continued, "rather than take the apartment in town. If that's still an option." Something flickered in Noah's eyes, relief, perhaps, or pleasure. "Of course. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." Home. The word resonated within Emma's chest. This place had become home to her in a way Boston never had, especially after her mother's death had left her and Eleanor at the mercy of their father's increasingly erratic behavior. "Thank you," she said simply. Noah moved away from the door, taking a seat on another hay bale, keeping a respectful distance between them. "I should be thanking you. The ranch hasn't run this smoothly in years." "Eleanor deserves most of the credit," Emma said. "She's thrived here." "You both have," Noah said. "You were pale, thin things when you arrived. Now look at you." Emma smiled, acknowledging the truth of his observation. The physical labor and abundant fresh food had strengthened them both. Eleanor's cheeks were perpetually rosy now, and Emma had noticed her own dresses fitting more snugly across the bust and hips, a fact that occasionally caught Noah's attention, though he was always quick to avert his gaze. "I never thought I could be happy here," Emma admitted. "After what happened in Boston, I couldn't imagine finding peace anywhere, let alone in the West." "What did happen in Boston?" Noah asked quietly. "If you don't mind my asking." Emma sighed, drawing the blanket tighter. "My father wasn't always a desperate man. He owned a shipping company, was respected in the community. After my mother died, he began drinking, gambling. He lost the business gradually, then our home. Eleanor and I were the last things of value he possessed." "So he sold you," Noah said, a hint of anger threading his voice. "To a business associate who'd won a significant sum from him at cards," Emma confirmed. "A man 3 times my age, who planned to marry me and use Eleanor as he pleased." Noah's hands clenched into fists. "Your own father." "He said we'd be provided for," Emma said tonelessly, "that it was better than poverty. When we refused, he drugged our tea and put us on a train west. The next thing we knew, we were standing on that auction block in Whiskey Creek." Noah was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Emma. No one deserves such betrayal, especially not from family." "It taught me a valuable lesson about trusting men," Emma said, then immediately regretted her words. "I didn't mean—" "I understand," Noah interrupted gently. "And I don't blame you for your caution." Outside, the rain had slackened to a gentle patter. Sunlight broke through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light through the cracks in the barn walls. "The storm's passing," Noah observed, standing. "I should check on the garden, see what damage was done." Emma rose as well, suddenly reluctant for their time alone to end. "I'll help." As they stepped outside into the freshly washed world, Emma impulsively reached for Noah's hand. He looked down at their joined fingers in surprise. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for understanding. For everything." Noah's fingers tightened around hers. "Always," he said simply. They walked hand in hand toward the garden, neither acknowledging the significance of the gesture, both acutely aware of the shift it represented. By September, Emma's school was ready to open. The old assay office had been transformed with fresh paint, new windows, and rows of simple desks crafted by the town carpenter. A slate board hung on the front wall, and bookshelves lined the back, filled with donated volumes and new readers Noah had ordered from Denver. 28 students enrolled, ranging in age from 6 to 16, the children of miners, shopkeepers, and ranch hands. Many had never attended formal school before, making Emma's task challenging but deeply rewarding. She traveled to town each morning with Noah on the days he served as sheriff, returning with him in the evenings. On days he remained at the ranch, Jasper escorted her, though the elderly ranch hand was increasingly frail as autumn approached. Eleanor stayed behind at the ranch, managing the household and continuing her transformation into a capable frontier woman. She'd taken to riding, helping with the cattle, and even learning some basic veterinary skills from Jasper. The pale, frightened girl from Boston was disappearing day by day, replaced by a confident young woman who often spoke of her desire to have a ranch of her own someday. As for Emma and Noah, their relationship continued its slow, careful evolution. Small touches a hand at the small of her back when he helped her into the wagon, fingers brushing when passing a plate at dinner became common. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal, especially during the long rides between town and ranch. Yet neither had spoken openly about their feelings, as if naming them might somehow break the delicate balance they had achieved, until the first snowfall of the season changed everything. It came earlier than expected, in mid-October. Emma had dismissed her students early as dark clouds gathered, but the storm moved faster than anyone anticipated. By the time Noah came to collect her, heavy flakes were already coating the ground. "We should stay in town," he said, concern evident in his voice. "The trail will be treacherous by nightfall." Emma shook her head. "Eleanor will worry if we don't return, and I don't have anything with me for an overnight stay." Noah frowned, clearly conflicted. "We'll try, but if it gets too bad, we turn back. Promise me that, Emma." She nodded, and they set off, the wagon moving slowly through the increasingly heavy snow. The temperature dropped rapidly as daylight faded, and Emma huddled close to Noah for warmth. A heavy blanket wrapped around them both. 3 miles from town, in the narrowest part of the trail, where it wound through a rocky pass, disaster struck. One of the wagon wheels hit an unseen rock, cracking the wooden rim. The wagon lurched sideways, nearly toppling before Noah managed to bring the horses to a halt. He jumped down to inspect the damage, snow swirling around him as he crouched by the wheel. When he straightened, his expression was grim. "It's broken clean through. We can't continue." Emma looked around at the barren landscape, anxiety building in her chest. "What do we do?" Noah was already unhitching one of the horses. "There's a line shack about half a mile east of here, a small shelter for ranch hands caught in bad weather. We'll leave the wagon and ride double to the shack." Emma had never ridden astride, let alone double with a man. But as the snow fell harder and the wind picked up, she knew they had no choice. Noah helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her, his chest solid and warm against her back. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, and they set off through the gathering storm. The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin with a small stove, narrow cot, and rough table with a single chair. But it was solid, windproof, and stocked with basic supplies: dried beans, coffee, flour, and most importantly, firewood. Noah immediately set about building a fire while Emma explored their shelter. A lantern hung from a ceiling beam, which Noah lit once the fire was going. The warm glow revealed a space that was crude but clean, with a few books stacked on a shelf and a deck of playing cards on the table. "It's not the Grand Hotel," Noah said, removing his snow-covered coat, "but it will keep us alive." Emma managed a smile, though her teeth were chattering. "It's perfect," Noah frowned, noticing her shivering. "Your dress is damp. You need to change." He moved to a trunk in the corner, rummaging until he found a flannel shirt and woolen trousers. "These will be too big, but they're dry. I'll step outside while you change." "No," Emma said quickly, the thought of him in the blizzard alarming her. "Just turn around, please." Noah nodded, facing the wall with rigid propriety while Emma struggled out of her wet clothing. The men's garments swallowed her, but they were wonderfully warm and smelled faintly of cedar and something distinctly Noah. "You can turn around now," she said, rolling up the sleeves and trouser legs. Noah's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his clothes, but he made no comment. Instead, he hung her dress near the stove to dry, then set about preparing a simple meal from the supplies on hand. As the small cabin warmed and the immediate danger passed, a new tension arose between them. The single cot seemed to occupy more space than its dimensions warranted, drawing both their gazes repeatedly as the evening progressed. They ate beans and hardtack in companionable silence, the howling wind and crackling fire the only sounds. Afterward, Noah taught Emma a simple card game, and they played for an hour, conversation gradually flowing more naturally. "Eleanor will be frantic," Emma said, as Noah dealt another hand. "Jasper knows about this shack. If we don't return, he'll guess where we are." Noah studied his cards. "He won't risk the journey tonight, but he'll come at first light if the snow lets up." Emma nodded, trying to focus on the game rather than the increasingly domestic feeling of the situation, or the way Noah's shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal strong forearms dusted with golden hair. As the night deepened, the inevitable could no longer be avoided. Noah gestured to the cot. "You should take it. I'll manage on the floor." Emma glanced at the rough plank floor, then at the narrow cot. Neither was meant to accommodate Noah's large frame. "We could share," she said, then blushed furiously at her own boldness. Noah's expression remained carefully neutral. "That wouldn't be proper." "Nothing about our situation has been proper from the beginning," Emma pointed out. "And it's foolish for either of us to be uncomfortable when the cot can fit us both. We're adults, Noah." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you're certain?" "I am." They settled onto the cot awkwardly, both fully clothed, lying rigidly side by side. Noah had placed his coat over them as an extra blanket, but despite the fire, the small cabin retained a chill. Gradually, the exhaustion of their ordeal overcame their self-consciousness. Emma found herself relaxing, her body instinctively seeking Noah's warmth. He remained still as she shifted closer, but when she shivered involuntarily, his arm came around her, drawing her against his side. "Better?" he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Emma nodded, her cheek resting against his shoulder. "Much." The steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear was soothing, and despite the strangeness of their situation, Emma felt safer than she had in years. As sleep began to claim her, she spoke without thinking. "I'm glad it was you who bought us that day." Noah's arm tightened around her. "So am I," he whispered. Emma tilted her face up to look at him, finding his eyes, dark and intense, fixed on hers. The flickering firelight cast shadows across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, now covered in a day's growth of beard. "Noah," she breathed, not entirely sure what she meant to say. He reached up with his free hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face with exquisite gentleness. "Emma," he replied, her name a question on his lips. She answered by closing the distance between them, pressing her mouth at his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as months of restrained emotion broke free. Noah's hand cupped the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her loose hair, as he returned her kiss with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Noah rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since July," he admitted. Emma smiled, her heart racing. "Why didn't you?" "You know why." His expression grew serious. "Emma, I never want you to feel obligated or coerced. The circumstances of our meeting," she silenced him with another kiss, "are in the past. This is now. This is us, Noah, choosing each other freely." Noah searched her face, and whatever he saw there must have convinced him, because he gathered her closer, his large hand splayed across her back. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have since that first day, when you stood so proudly on that auction block, protecting your sister." Tears pricked Emma's eyes. "I love you too. I fought against it for so long, told myself it was impossible given our situation, but my heart wouldn't listen." Noah's smile transformed his usually serious face, making him look younger, almost boyish. "Eleanor will be insufferably pleased with herself. She's been dropping hints for months." Emma laughed softly. "She's always been the romantic one." They talked late into the night, holding each other close as the storm raged outside. Plans were made, dreams shared, and when sleep finally claimed them, they remained entwined, as if even unconsciousness couldn't persuade them to let go now that they'd found each other. Morning brought clear skies and the sound of approaching horses. Noah kissed Emma one last time, before opening the cabin door to find Jasper and Eleanor, both looking worried and relieved in equal measure. Eleanor took one look at her sister, wearing Noah's clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders, standing close enough to touch him, and broke into a radiant smile. "Well," she said, "it's about time." The wedding took place on Christmas Day 1875, in the newly built church in Whiskey Creek. Snow blanketed the town, and pine boughs decorated with red ribbons adorned every pew. Eleanor stood beside Emma as her maid of honor, resplendent in a green velvet dress that Noah had ordered specially from Denver. Emma wore ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, a gown far finer than she'd ever expected to possess again after their father's downfall. Noah had insisted, overriding her practical objections with uncharacteristic stubbornness. "You'll be the most beautiful bride this town has ever seen," he'd declared, and standing before the mirror on her wedding day, Emma had to admit the effect was everything he'd promised. The church was filled to capacity. Emma's students and their families, Noah's deputies and ranch hands, shopkeepers and miners, and everyone else from the growing town. Even Marcus Green attended, his expression sour but his manner correct, nodding stiffly to Noah as he passed. When Emma walked down the aisle on Jasper's arm, the old ranch hand having tearfully accepted her request to give her away, she saw only Noah waiting at the altar. His eyes never left her face as she approached, his expression a mixture of awe and adoration that made her heart swell. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, exchanging simple gold bands. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Noah's kiss was gentle but full of promise, bringing a cheer from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward filled the town hall with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. Eleanor danced with every unmarried man present, her laughter bright and infectious. Emma noticed several of the young ranchers watching her sister with undisguised interest, and wondered if another wedding might be in their future before long. As evening fell, Noah led Emma to the waiting sleigh that would take them to a hotel in Denver for a brief honeymoon, another of his surprises. Wrapped in furs against the cold, they waved goodbye to the townspeople who had become their friends and family. "Happy?" Noah asked as the sleigh glided through the snowy streets, the sound of bells mixing with the horses' hooves. Emma nestled against him, remembering that terrifying day on the auction block less than a year ago. How far they had come. How completely her life had transformed. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "And you?" Noah's arm tightened around her. "More than I ever thought possible." As the sleigh carried them away from town, snow began to fall again, soft, delicate flakes that caught in Emma's hair like tiny stars. She tilted her face up to the sky, marveling at the beauty of this wild country that had become her home. "What are you thinking?" Noah asked, watching her with tender amusement. Emma smiled, lowering her gaze to meet his. "That sometimes, what begins as tragedy can become the greatest blessing." Noah kissed her then, with all the warmth and passion that had sustained them through months of uncertainty. When they broke apart, breathless and laughing, the future stretched before them, bright and full of promise, like the untouched snow covering the trail ahead. 5 years later. 1880. The schoolhouse buzzed with excitement as Emma Holloway arranged flowers on her desk, preparing for the end-of-year celebration. 5 years had passed since she'd first stood in this room, facing 28 uncertain children. Now, the school boasted nearly 50 students and an assistant teacher, a young woman from Denver who shared Emma's passion for education. "Mama, look what I drew!" 4-year-old Charlotte Holloway burst through the door, waving a paper covered in colorful scribbles. With her father's blue eyes and her mother's honey blonde hair, she was a perfect blend of them both. Emma knelt to examine the artwork. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that our house?" Charlotte nodded vigorously. "And the horses, and baby James in his cradle, and Uncle Jasper with his funny hat." Emma smiled, thinking of her 1-year-old son sleeping peacefully at home under Eleanor's watchful eye. "Shall we put it on display for the celebration?" Charlotte beamed with pride as Emma pinned the drawing to the wall alongside the older student's more sophisticated work. The door opened again, and Noah entered, looking distinguished in the suit he wore for his newest role as circuit judge, a position he'd accepted the previous year, passing the sheriff's badge to his most trusted deputy. "There are my favorite ladies," he said, lifting Charlotte into his arms and kissing Emma's cheek. "Ready for the big event?" Emma nodded, surveying the decorated schoolroom. "Just about. Is Eleanor here yet?" "Pulling up now with Robert and the baby." Noah set Charlotte down, letting her run to the window to watch for her aunt's arrival. Eleanor had married Robert Taylor, owner of the largest cattle ranch neighboring theirs, 3 years earlier. Their son, Thomas, had been born just 2 months after James, making the cousins nearly as close as brothers. The two families had merged their lands, creating one of the most successful operations in the territory. "Aunt Eleanor!" Charlotte shouted, running outside to greet the approaching wagon. Noah pulled Emma into his arms, taking advantage of their momentary privacy. "Have I told you today how beautiful you are, Mrs. Holloway?" Emma smiled up at him, noting the new strands of silver at his temples that only added to his handsome appearance. "Not since breakfast." "A terrible oversight," he murmured, kissing her properly. They were interrupted by Eleanor's arrival, baby Thomas on her hip, and her husband Robert carrying a large basket of food for the celebration. "Still acting like newlyweds, I see," Eleanor teased, her own happiness evident in her sparkling eyes. Emma laughed, taking her nephew from her sister's arms. "As if you're any better." The schoolroom soon filled with families arriving for the year-end festivities. Emma watched with pride as her students performed recitations and songs they'd practiced for weeks. Charlotte sat on Noah's lap, clapping enthusiastically for each performance. Later, as the celebration wound down and families began to depart, Emma found herself standing on the schoolhouse steps beside Noah, watching the sun set over the mountains that had become as familiar to her as the back of her hand. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is our life," she said softly. Noah's arm slipped around her waist. "Having regrets, Mrs. Holloway?" Emma leaned into his embrace. "Not a single one." From inside came the sound of Eleanor's laughter, mingling with the happy babble of their children. The town of Whiskey Creek spread before them, no longer the rough mining camp it had been 5 years ago, but a growing community with a church, school, and proper businesses. "Do you ever think about that day?" Noah asked, his voice low. "The auction?" Emma considered the question. "Less and less," she admitted. "It feels like another lifetime, something that happened to different people." Noah nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I received a letter last week, from Boston." Emma stiffened slightly. "My father?" "Yes." Noah hesitated. "He's ill. Dying, according to the doctor who wrote on his behalf. He's asking to see you and Eleanor before the end." Emma was silent for a long moment, processing this unexpected news. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet. It's not my decision to make." Noah turned to face her fully. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you. If you want to go, I'll come with you. If you want to stay, we'll never speak of it again." Emma looked past him to where Eleanor stood in the schoolhouse doorway, bouncing baby James on her hip while Charlotte showed something to her cousin Thomas. The family they had built from the ashes of betrayal, strong, loving, unbreakable. "We should discuss it with Eleanor," she said finally. "But I think perhaps we should go, not for him, but for ourselves, to close that chapter completely." Noah nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Whatever you need?" "I have everything I need right here," Emma said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "The rest is just details." As they turned to rejoin their family, Emma felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The path that had led her west had been paved with tears and fear, but it had brought her to this moment, to Noah, to their children, to a life fuller and richer than she could have imagined. The auction block that had once seemed like an ending had instead been a beginning, the first step on a journey that had transformed 2 frightened women and 1 honorable cowboy into a family bound not by obligation or circumstance, but by the deepest love imaginable. And in the golden light of the setting sun, with Noah's hand warm in hers and their children's laughter filling the air, Emma knew with absolute certainty that some endings were worth every tear, for they led to beginnings beyond one's wildest dreams.